Hey, good evening. Welcome to Wednesday Night in the Word. Get my iPad turned around there, and I don't have any trouble staying in the frame. It's getting in the middle of it. I fill the frame up pretty good anyway these days, but we won't get into all that. Too late, I know, but glad you're in the house tonight. We got a nice crowd here tonight, and we're looking forward to jumping in here with what the Lord's working on us. I do want to make an announcement. This is a little out of the ordinary for us, but there will be Wednesday, February 22nd at Riverfront Park from 12 to 1. There'll be Ash Wednesday, imposition of ashes will be there. That's where they burn the palm leaves from last year's Palm Sunday and mix it with oil and anoint people. It commemorates the beginning of Lent, and I'm not real up to speed on some of this kind of stuff, but it's happening Wednesday. If you're interested, it will be from 12 to 1 at Riverfront Park in Ravenswood, sponsored by JCMA. So if you can make it there and you want to receive anointing and ashes to do your Lent, to participate in whatever is in your heart for Lent, then you're welcome to join. So I want to make sure I get that announced tonight. So that's a week from tonight. So anyway, we're going to get in the Word tonight. I want to talk about, last week we talked about striving for mastery. And in that conversation, we kind of ventured into being unskilled. And we talked some about what that meant. And so I want to kind of press that just a little further today. So I titled this tonight, Becoming Skilled, and Becoming Skillful. And so my reason for that is that so often we are, we're just kind of, our faith life is just kind of left to and relegated to the leftovers of every other demand on us, from making a living to all of those kinds of things. We kind of, I won't say it takes a back seat, but at best it rides shotgun, okay? And I believe that our faith life needs to be allowed to drive more. I used to, early on in my Christian life, I would see the license plates. God is my co-pilot. Thinking, I want him to be my pilot. I want him to be doing the steering. I want to be able to entrust my direction and my life to him, and be there to learn to pilot along the way, and be there. But let him be large and in charge, right? And so I think sometimes we have, it sounds like a pretty good slogan, and we roll with it. So I just think sometimes that we're not as committed, and I'm not trying to be, forceful or whatever, but I think that's part of what shows first. When we hit a tough stretch, when we hit a tough spot, then we either dig in or we fall out, right? I mean, that's kind of, and you just about, for some folks, you can just about flip a coin on that. But I believe you're here tonight and you're with us tonight because, Wednesday night is really, in my estimation, is the night where you can kind of start digging a little deeper and pushing a little further into the Word, right? And you can kind of move yourself a little tighter, a little closer to the goodness of God, and into. This says a lot about your priority in life when you're here. And I realize you can't be here all the time. I understand that. I'm not trying to lay guilt or condemnation on anybody that's not here tonight. But if you have to sit down and try to remember how long it's been since you've been on a Wednesday night, you may need to ask yourself that question. So we'll just leave it at that and move on. All right? Anyway, so, what's it mean to become skilled? Or we ventured into, talking about being unskilled. To be skillful means, and each of us has been unskillful at some point in time, right? We talked about development of infants last week during the course of this. And we have the great example for us right now is, Jace is, 9 months old, something like that, 8 or 9 months old, and he's found his feet, right? We're old. Most of us here are old enough to know what our feet are and what we need to use them for. But he's developing that sense of what this is and how this works, right? So we're a little more skilled in that department. I'm not going to say we use them a whole lot better at times, because if it's on even ground, I got a fighting chance. But you get me on a slope, and I'm liable to do tricks. Okay, just say. But that's part of what I'm talking about. As a Christian and as a believer, we have to discover things that might be mundane for others, but we discover them because we're going to put them to use. We're going to learn how that they benefit our life. Okay, and so anyway, so to be unskillful, which we all have been, and some of us still are at some point and in some ways, is to be inexperienced, ignorant, or untried. And there's a lot of variations on that. I don't want to get too far into the weeds on that, but it may also result from a lack of education or undereducation. Staying undeveloped or underdeveloped keeps us stuck in a deficient or a negative loop, a cycle of repetitive behavior that is unhealthy and unprofitable. Okay, so we're looking to break out, if you will. We're looking to move forward. If you read the story and pay attention to the story of the children of Israel, all these things were written for our examples, Paul said. They were written for us to learn something. And what is it? Well, just don't forget God along the way. Stay faithful to what He is, to who He is, and hold Him in the preeminent position in your life, and you can save yourself a whole lot of trouble. Right? I mean, it doesn't mean that you don't have moments and seasons where you're tried or tested, but it means that you find a way through them, perhaps with a little more efficiency and a little more confidence, we'll say, than if you're kind of cycling around. That was the whole purpose. One of the reasons for Israel's cry for a king was because they had these terrible cycles through the period of the judges, where they would have a judge that was true to God and kept them kind of on point and kept them, focused. And when that person would fade away and nobody else stepped forward to do that, then they just kind of fell off everything and just kind of went, just didn't have sense enough to self-govern, didn't have sense enough to make God the priority. And so they had these huge down cycles, and they would become oppressed and under the heel of the Midianites and Philistines and Hittites and just different folks in the region that they were adversarial with. And then another judge would raise up, and he or she would reignite faith, reignite their hope, and get them squared around, and they would emerge victorious, only to find themselves again shortly in another downward cycle. The reasoning behind the king was they didn't have, I think one of the reasons is that they wanted a consistent, all the other nations had kings. And so when one king passed off the scene, then someone from that lineage immediately stepped up and became king. And so from the outside looking in, it looks like this is the answer to that, because you keep a steady hand at the rudder. All right, you keep a steady hand on the wheel, and you got somebody that's going to stand up and be king and make decisions and guide us and steer us. What they didn't plan on was, what they didn't count on and didn't think about was that there were some pretty dark hearts that wound up ascending the throne. Yeah. And there were they were vulnerable to outside influence. Even good kings were. David was not invulnerable to that himself. and Solomon certainly was not. So, I mean, we can, even the good kings had those moments, and then you had the ones that didn't have those, didn't have any moments on the good side of it. You had guys like Ahab and Rehoboam, and some of those guys that were, just a complete disaster as far as kingship goes. What I'm getting at with this is that they thought they could fix it with a system. And this, I believe, sometimes is where what kind of gets our eyes off of him. We think we can build a system that will give us the kind of security and the kind of stability that we need. When what really gives it to us and what really works it in us is a relationship of faith that where we keep him as our top priority, and he is first and foremost in our life, and we let Jesus have the preeminence in our life. And if we can do that on a consistent basis, then we see our lives are much better. They are much more consistently blessed and consistently at peace and in rest. Okay. So anyway, I've gotten into some stuff I hadn't planned on getting into there altogether, so imagine that. We get caught in these loops of negativity and these things that cause us to spiral down, and we don't know except until we hit bottom, and then the only way to go is up, and then we turn around and we get things straightened around. But how about if we just stayed consistent along the way, right? So sometimes fear of failure comes into play. And one of the guys that really hit me was the servant that when Jesus teaches the parable of the talents, he gives 10 talents to one guy, he gives 5 to another, and gives 1 to another. And they all know what he's like. And so the man with 10 puts it to work, and this in Matthew 25, and he uses that initial investment to grow and to increase. The man with 5 talents uses puts that to work and allows that to grow and increase and makes 5 more. But the guy with 1 talent is so afraid that he's going to mess up. He's so afraid that he's going to do it wrong, or he's going to lose it and have to face the face of the giver, that he hides it. He hides it and he keeps it to himself so he can give the talent back to him. But what God puts in your life, and when we think of talents, we think of anything from singing to whatever, but talent's a measure of wealth. Okay, it's a weight of gold or silver, or it's a way that wealth was measured out in the ancient world. So he's not talking about some of the things that we get caught up with as far as how we define talent. But what he says of this guy is, he said, I knew you were an austere man. I knew you were that you reaped where you didn't sow, and that you have this way about you that's intimidating, and that made me afraid. And so fear can paralyze us. And this guy suffered from the paralysis of fear because of the reputation of his gift giver. And he did not put it to work. He did not allow it to be put out to grow or develop or do anything any more than stay like it was. And I believe if there's anything that sums up some lifestyles of faith, it's that what God initially invests in our life, we're so afraid of putting it out there that we just hold on to it so that we've just got what he gave us to start with, and there's not growth, there's not increase, there's not development, there's not an expansion of the kingdom, if you will, in your life. And so I think that's a great tragedy, and it's difficult, and there's this mindset. We have this, I talked about this some last week, but this minimalist idea of salvation. We treat it like I just want to know what I got to do to get in. In fact, there's a grand old hymn called Just Inside the Gate. Right? Just inside the gate. I just want to get inside the gate. Don't care about nothing else, just want to get inside the gate. And that sounds humble. Okay, from one vantage point, that sounds humble, like just a cabin in the corner of glory land. It sounds humble, but it's really a minimalist viewpoint. It's just tell me the least I have to do and be responsible for, so that I'm not going to burn forever. I want my fire insurance certified, and that's all I care about. And so until we shake free from some of those lingering attitudes, then, that's, in my estimation, that's one of the reasons why the kingdom hasn't flourished as it could, particularly in our area, is because we have these don't do any more than you have to mindsets, okay? And so let's go. I want to look at, I talked about this last week, and I don't know that I quoted it just right, so I'm going to read it tonight. I'm going to start at Luke 12. And I'm just going to read verses 47 and 48. And this is part of something larger, but I'm just after this one element from here. It says, "And that servant which knew his Lord's will, and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes." Now, there's been one thing we've been talking about since 2022 started to come to a close. It's been a season of watchfulness and preparation. It's paying attention to what God's doing, paying attention and allowing Him, focusing on His redemptive work and how we can grow in that, how we can increase in that, because the kingdom of God is designed to it's designed to never cease to increase. Right? The prophet said, "Of the increase of his government," and this next part's really cool, "and peace, there shall be no end." Right? So that means that no matter how good your peace is today, it still has room for improvement. Amen. Hallelujah. It still can grow. It still can become more. It can still expand and increase, grow stronger, be better. And you and I are the beneficiaries of that, right? We benefit from that. That is something that makes that blesses and enhances our life. It's something that allows us to realize and appreciate the favor of God, and it will pull a praise out of you. It will draw worship out of you. It will set you in a place where you just want to thank God for His goodness and His mercy, right? It's the goodness of God that leads us to repentance, Paul said as he wrote to the Romans. And that goodness of God is what we look to move us forward and upward in our journey. And if this stuff is not growing, if we're hiding our talent, if we are burying it in the earth, if we are wrapping it in a napkin. There's one in Luke that talks about, it's the same basic parable. It doesn't use the word talents, uses the word pound. And the one that didn't do anything with it, he wrapped it in a napkin and hid it, right? And so, there's something about this, we're so, when we set under preaching and teaching that is designed to just, to motivate us by fear or to keep us in this mindset where God's okay and He's good, but we've still got Him in this place where Jesus so changed this because we're still waiting on God to be unhappy with what we've done. Because we think He's not just our Heavenly Father, we think He's the divine critic in the sky. And He wants to absolutely just dress us down and dress us out with everything, every little detail that we've done wrong along the way. And when Jesus makes the statement to His disciples, and He says, "Fear not, little flock. It is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." What a phenomenal statement, right? I mean, just think of the ages and the generations of imagery about how stern and austere. You have to understand that there's a lot of folks that read the scripture that says God's angry every day, and they think God's still upset and aggravated all the time. And this becomes, He's mad God's angry every day, and so we better watch out. It's kind of Listen, I'm not saying that God's going to let you walk all over him, because God's still God. But by the same token, he's more interested in all that you're doing, that he can bless and encourage and teach you to do better, than he is to say, well, it's like, bringing a report card home, and you made all A's and one B, or all A's and one C, and nobody says anything about the A's, and all they talk about is, well, why'd you get the B? Or how come you got a C? And the focus is on that. So we've had these experiences that make us reluctant, I'll say, or gun shy about everything that we might do that may not quite be up to par. And God's just saying, hey, you're in there giving it your best, and we'll get better at this, but you're doing great over here. We'll work on this other part, right? God's a God of encouragement. He's a God of who if you center your life on him, and you give him the priority and the preeminence in your life, God works with you where you are, and he gives you peace and grace along the way. It's a win-win. Right? Because what you're also doing is developing too. You're also learning something in the process. You're also finding your way forward. You may be not as fast as you think you should, because sometimes we're a lot harder on ourselves than God is. But this man prepared not. He knew his Lord's will, and he prepared not himself, and he didn't do according to his will. So not only he knew what it was, but he didn't prepare himself, and he didn't give himself to it. So I'm telling you, that puts you in a position of correction rather than, and even in correction there's instruction. That being said, there's a form of instruction that does not necessarily feel like correction. Okay? Doesn't feel like you're getting, and I know people think, boy, if you don't stand up front and beat the sheep, you're not preaching the gospel. But I'm here to tell you, the gospel ain't a sheep beating gospel. The gospel is a gospel of encouragement. It's a gospel of life. It's a gospel of peace. It's a gospel that says come, that says you're welcome, that says God will receive you just as you are, but you won't stay just as you are. He will change you. He will mold you. He will develop and call you into something bigger. And while he may be working with you in this dimension and in this particular area, he will be preparing you for more. Because that's just what God does. Let me finish this and get into the meat of what I want to say tonight. So anyway, but he prepared not himself, neither did according to his will. He was beaten with many stripes. But he that knew not and did commit things worthy of stripes shall be beaten with few stripes. For whomsoever much is given of him shall be much required, and to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more. So what we've done is we've taken this and we've saying this is our favorite cop-out verse. And so don't tell me anything new. Don't try to encourage me to learn more or go deeper, because then there's more required of me. So I'll do just the minimum that I want to do, and I don't want to know any more than that, so I won't be beaten with many stripes. Because again, for most of us, it's about the beating. We're focused more on the beating than we are on the growth, on the development, on becoming something more, right? And so, who loses in that? We lose. I'm not saying you lose your salvation. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm saying that you don't reap the bigger benefit. You and I are not as fruitful in that mentality. And when we're not as fruitful, then that affects the generations after us, because they see how we're doing it, and they either don't want to do it that way, or they're going to keep doing it that way, and they're going to have the same result. Right? Because the problem with that is that until we shake free from that kind of thinking and that manner of thinking, then we're always going to remain less skilled than we should be. But the gospel, as we covered last week and we're talking about now, the gospel says, Paul said, strive for mastery. Work for it. Give yourself to it. Look at it as an aim. I want to be well equipped. I want to have on the whole armor of God. I want to, and you think, well, why would I want the whole armor of God on? I'm nobody. You are the world to someone. They may be that tall, or they may be finding their way into adulthood from childhood, but you become the world to them. And so the better that you are, the more fully you develop, then the better equipped you are to help them develop as well. Okay? And that's a very important element that I think we just kind of think everybody's just going to, let's just get real here for a minute. Everybody thinks that, we don't have a lot of time, so there's not much point in putting the effort in it. And we've been saying it now for more than 100 years anyway. And here we are. I remember when we weren't going to get out of the 70s. Right? And then I remember in the 80s when it was, they give you 88 reasons why it was all going to be over in 1988. Then when that didn't pan out, we had, the year Y2K starts looming, and it's, oh my God, we made it through the Jupiter effect, and we made it through, some of this other stuff. So when the century changes, then boom, we're going to get out of here in 93, because that's 7 years ahead of time. And then we didn't get out of 93. Well, maybe it's a 2.5 year thing, and maybe it's going to be here. And then everything was going to crash in 2000. It wasn't, and here we are, 22, 23 years past this. Just think, had we said, okay, if he comes, he comes. But in the meantime, I'm going to live as if he ain't. I'm going to live like there is a tomorrow. And I want to prepare for that. And I want to prepare my children for that. I want to prepare my grandchildren for that. I want them to be equipped for the future. And as it turns out, we don't even, all this world cataclysm stuff has been co-opted now by the secular community. So kudos to you guys, because you passed it on well. Make a crisis out of anything. So anyway, forgive me. Let me move on. Please. Yes, thank you. Somebody prayed I'd move on. Let's go. All right. Good deal. Maybe. Yeah. All right. So what I want to do now is I want to go to Hebrews chapter 5. So that's the wrong way to do this. I'm going to start with verse 8 of Hebrews chapter 5. I'm going to give you some background on it. And I'm going to read into chapter 6 and verse 3. Because just for what I think is important continuity, the men were inspired to write. And the Bible was divided and sectioned into chapters and verses. Codified is the scholastic term for that. The Bible was codified by men so it would be easier to find things. And what we do with that is we think when this chapter ends, we're starting a brand new thought in the next chapter, and that's not always the case. Right. So anytime you're looking at a chapter and you start with verse 1 and it says, therefore, that means you need to back up a little bit, because therefore means what we just said is important. Right. Yep. Right. We just made a statement in there that we're basing the next statement off of, that we're using as a springboard or a launch pad. Anyway, and I'm not trying to pick it at the word here tonight. I'm just saying that sometimes you need to look at this as if the chapter divisions sometimes need to overlay a little differently, in my humble and undereducated estimation. I'll say it that way. So there. But what the writer is talking about is he has been speaking to the priesthood of Jesus. Coming into this chapter, he's talking about the shifting of the priesthood. that there has been that we are moving into, and he starts to venture into the Melchizedek priesthood. He starts here, and then we're going to read through here where he's going to say, I got a lot of stuff to tell you about all this, but I can't. I can't tell you everything I want to tell you today. Why? Because you're dull of hearing and you're unskilled. So first off, I got to encourage you and exhort you to grow and get a better grip on your basics and get a better understanding of what's happening so that I can tell you more about Melchizedek, about the priesthood of Jesus. And so this whole book is this back and forth between, I believe Paul wrote it. And while I know there's a lot of folks that say, well, it's not written in the Pauline style. Well, he wasn't writing to the Gentiles, folks. He was writing to the Jews, and he had to shift the way he spoke and the way he communicated. And that's what I'm going to say. It's not going to sound like all the other ones. So I'm going to at least give him that level of expertise and grace to be able to do that. And if you don't believe he wrote it, I'm okay with that too. We just know whoever wrote it, God breathed on them and they wrote it. Okay. Anyway, so he gets into this thing where he's talking about Christ, and he's talking about how he became and stepped into this magnificent priesthood, right? And so he talks about. He talks about him in Gethsemane in verse 7 here. And he talks about him that was offered up strong prayers and tears from him that was able to save him from death, right? And was heard in that he feared. And I don't know that I don't want to say that Jesus was afraid to die. I don't believe that. I believe he came to do that very thing. I think that in the garden, it was that moment, the imminence of it, the weight of it, the heaviness of it, as it settled on him, it was not comfortable. It wasn't a walk in the park. It wasn't a meh, no big deal. It was a big deal. It was the very pivotal moment of creation. Yeah. God laid the world out for that moment, and the weight of everything created, the weight of everything that had ever been and fallen, and the weight of everything that was going to be because of him was on him. And nobody understood that but him. And the weight of that and the depth of that and the magnitude of that was so heavy that great drops of sweat, like drops of blood, popped out on his forehead and fell to the ground. He was in agony when he prayed. Okay? The point is, what the writer here says is that when he offered this up, he offered it up in a way that said, if this cup can pass from me, if there's any way that we can, if there's another way other than your will, he knew his will, right? But if there was another way, if I've missed it, then teach me, then show me. But there was not another way that came forward, right? And so he says, and being made perfect. I'm in verse 8. I started in verse 9. I want to go to verse 8. Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things he suffered. So he was willing to bear that weight, suffer that agony, even though he was the Son of God, even though he was the Son of Man, even though he was everything promised to the patriarchs. He was all of that and so much more. Even though he had never done anything to violate or alienate himself from his heavenly Father. He had stayed in constant contact and fellowship with the fatherhood of God throughout his life. And this moment was so heavy, and it was so real, it was so vivid and tangible and so powerful, the weight of it and the magnitude of it, that he cried out, if there's another way, let this cup pass from me. But then he settled himself. He said, nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Not my will, but thy will be done. I'm ready. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do what you want. See, he's not a servant who knew his Lord's will, didn't prepare his heart, and didn't do it. Right? He's the very opposite of that. And so anyway, though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. He did not allow his suffering and his agony to prevent him from being obedient to the will and purpose of God for his life. And that, folks, is the grand tale. There's an echo of the words of Job in it to some degree. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Even if it doesn't, even if it's not what I expected, even if it's not what I thought, my trust and my hope and my faith is still in him, right? Yeah. And so even though he were a son, he learned obedience, yet learned the obedience by the things which he suffered, verse 9. And being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey him. So he is the captain and the author of our salvation. Why? Because he did the will of his Father. Because he came low in the volume of the book, the word says, it is written of me, I come to do thy will, O God. Yeah. Right? And so he pressed himself, even when it was uncomfortable for his flesh, even when it was painful, even when it was agonizing for him to think about what he would suffer physically. The emotional drain was exhausting. Yeah. Called of God and high priest after the order of Melchizedek. So he's taken the priesthood to a new level. We're not talking Levi here. We're not talking Levitical. We're not talking Aaronic. We're not talking about that kind of priesthood. He has shown us a higher priesthood. Yeah. One that is based not on the power of a carnal commandment, but on the authority of an endless life. Because he knew his life was not over. He had the power to lay it down, and he would have the power to raise it again. He says he's called of God and high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Verse 11, of whom we have many things to say and hard to be uttered, seeing you are dull of hearing. So that's not exactly a compliment, right? He goes on to explain that. The reason why I'm kind of, while we're looking at being prepared, being watchful, being ready, having a readiness and being prepared and being sober, being vigilant, all of those things that we've been talking about now for 2 months that you probably are getting kind of tired of hearing every week or twice a week. When you start to think about this, you start to remember that there's a world full of people that God has deep things and marvelous things to speak and share and communicate that they are not able to hear because they haven't developed their senses. They haven't maintained the priority. He says, I've got so much to tell you about Melchizedek. I believe God wants to say some things to us about this priesthood. I do. And they're not easily said, right? They're hard. Paul says they're hard to be uttered. They're not going to be, it's not just like an easy connect, three-point connect the dots picture here. Right? He said, seeing you're dull of hearing. The word dull there, so let me get my notes out here because I sat down and wrote this stuff out earlier. Dull means sluggish, lazy. Here's the word, stupid, slothful. This word's used one more time in the book of Hebrews in the next chapter over, and it's translated as slothful. Now, see, I know stupid's a word we don't use anymore because it's bad. But we can drop about every other four-letter bomb we can in our culture, but we can't use that one. There's some other words we can't use too. Some of us. Forgive me, I still speak a little Egyptian once in a while. Anyway, just kidding, sort of, okay? But it means that you're not hearing well. We've talked about obedience being something that's linked to hearing intelligently and hearing clearly, right? It was some of this stuff it's designed for us to understand and comprehend. Okay? And he says, he goes on to say, why are you dull of hearing? Why are you sluggish? Why are your ears stopped up? Does it seem to be hearing it lazily? Right? I tell this great story on my family here. I don't know how many of them are watching, but some of you might get it. There's this great story at the house when we were younger. We were kids. And my mom wanted my sister to pick her hairbrush up and out of the floor. And she was kind of sitting on the floor. She said, hey, pick that hairbrush up. Okay. And she just sat there. And Mom went and did something else and said, pick your hairbrush up. She said, okay. And she just sat there. So the next time through, Mom picks up the hairbrush, it turns the bristles out and wraps her on top of the head with it. And she starts crying because she was just getting ready to do it. Right? Particularly when you felt the bristles. She was just getting ready to do it. See, that's what sluggish hearing. Not necessarily motivated to get it done in the immediate future. You know, I worked with another gal some years back that says, oh, what we don't do today, we'll do tomorrow. And every Friday she'd say, what we don't do today, we'll do next week. Anyway, you know, you have that sometimes. But that's part of being sluggish. There's part of, you know, you have to figure out some things here, right? And so he goes on to say, for when the time you ought, you're dull of hearing, for when the time you ought to be teachers, you have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God, and are become such as have need of milk and not of strong meat. For everyone that uses milk is unskillful in a word of righteousness, for he is a babe. He's a baby, an infant. But strong meat belongs to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. Therefore, leaving the principles of the doctrine of Christ, let us go on unto perfection or maturity. What's he been talking about? Immaturity, right? So this is, we've moved over into chapter 6 now. Not laying again the foundation of repentance from dead works and of faith toward God, of the doctrine of baptisms and of the laying on of hands and of the resurrection of the dead and of eternal judgment. And this will we do if God permits. So I want to go back to chapter 5. I just wanted to bring that into the context of what he's talking about, because he starts off with therefore. He's talking about moving on to maturity. That means moving on to being skilled, moving on to mastery, moving on to having a not necessarily a comprehensive knowledge of the Bible. That's wonderful if you can do that. And I would encourage you to do all of that you can. I'm having trouble with my wire here. It gets caught ever so often. So anyway, but, he talks about, so some of the hallmarks, if you will, or attributes of being unskillful is you're dull of hearing. You have a weak grasp of basics. That means, when the time comes and you should be teachers, you need somebody to teach you. It means you don't have the basics arranged properly in a way that you can communicate them, and you are have enough self-confidence to be able to teach and communicate from that vantage point, right? And then the other thing is you have a long-standing immaturity. We talked about some of this last week, and that is that, there's nothing wrong with being a babe in Christ. Peter talks about as newborn babes desire the sincere milk of the word, that you may grow by it, that you might develop, because it takes the milk of the word initially to add what you can, because you cannot chew. Right. Haven't popped any teeth through. Pork chops are not on the menu until you reach a certain age. Got to have some choppers for that, right? Anyway, and there's no condemnation whatsoever to people who are young and growing and learning and drinking milk. There's nothing wrong with that. It's when we've been 10, 20, or more years into this, and we still want our Baba. And if we don't get it, we're going to go pout in the corner and suck our thumb.
Right.
So, that's the immaturity I think he's dealing with here. This is the long-standing immaturity. The folks that have wanted to do the minimum, and they have been either paralyzed by fear or not wanting to take any kind of risk and get out there. They want to do the least they can, because who much is given, much is required of. And so I want as few stripes as I can possibly get. So that's how do we remedy those things? Well, if we're going to remedy dullness of hearing, then we have to make a commitment to being a better listener. We have to, and not just being a better listener, that's part of it. It starts there. It's one of the greatest skills. I said this last week, and I can't say it enough. It's one of the greatest skills that any of us can develop, is learning to be better listeners. That when people need to talk, that you can give them an ear. And you can do it in a way. Listen, there's a time when you have to be able to add some objectivity to stuff. Because if you're always petting, stroking, and all, it's okay, sweetie. It's all it's always somebody else's fault, and it's never your fault. Then that's not always being a good listener. Okay. Now listen, I'm not trying to be critical here. Not intentionally. What I'm after here is that you want to be a good listener, but keep your objectivity. Keep yourself in a posture, in a position where if you have to say something outside of that thought process, or you are prompted to do so, you can do it, and do it in the right spirit, and do it in a spirit that's helpful and that doesn't feel like it's accusing them or an allegation, and you don't want to come at them railing, and you don't want to do those kind of things, right? Because that's not productive and it's not helpful. Right. Anyway, so commit to being a better listener. Learn how to listen. If you want to work with people, or you want to be, I had a gentleman several years back, it's been probably a good 30 or so, that he made the statement that, he loved the ministry. It was people he didn't like. Yeah. And, there are days when people make it tough. I'll give you that. But the reality of it is we're in the people business. So people, serving people's the business of the ministry. So you can't expect to succeed in the long term with an attitude like that. Right. And, there's probably a certain amount of play involved in that. I get that, but there was, and I didn't feel as much play from it as, in the moment anyway. But commit to being a better listener. That means you got to wade through some stuff, right? So if you're weak or unconfident in the grasp of basics, then you commit to personal study and to understand basics. You ask questions. You get with people, or you talk to folks that you have confidence in. Say, hey, can you help me with this? I'm thinking, I saw this. I'm not sure how it fits, and maybe that's part of what it means to. One of the reasons why the Torah, admonished people to find a teacher, was because so that if you had questions, you had a consistent voice in your life that you could go to and say, what about this? Can you help me with this? Right. And so a good teacher, a wise master will be able to help you, but not just be able to help you, he'll be able to help you find it yourself too. Mm-hmm. See, it's the beauty. One of the things that I really get a kick out of, and you can watch it play out in the Gospels, is that rabbinical discourse is questions answered by questions. Okay? Now, some people call that, I think, the Socratic method. I think that Socrates did some of that, and so there's some folks that say Jesus used the Socratic method. I'm thinking, well, he may have, but the rabbinical method was there, and that's kind of what they did. Right. So I'm gonna make this simple. If a teacher said, what's 3 plus 3? Nobody blurts out the answer 6. That's not the right answer. Mathematically, it's correct. But you would say, what's 4 plus 2? Someone else might say, what's 12 minus 6? Right? And so there's all these, you're saying, you're arriving at the same conclusion, but you're trying to say it so many different ways. You say, well, that's kind of crazy. And for us, it is, because we like direct. But that's part of why, but part of that but what that does is it teaches people how to find an answer themselves. How to go about digging it out. Not just say, well, it's 6, stupid. And believe you me, I know people that have answered that way. I have been answered that way. Anyhow, you have those, it's not just the direct, it's not just about getting the answer. It's about teaching people how to discover the answer. Okay? Teaching them how to find it. And a method to do that. And that's kind of that. So find something, commit yourself to trying to understand the basics. And what that does is it builds a platform for you to stand on, or for you to speak from, or for you to communicate from. And then maybe you say, well, I'm not called to be a teacher, or, a preacher. I'm not called to stand up, but you're called to impart to your children. Whether you're mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, you're called to impart to your children. So you have a good grasp of the basics. You have a platform by which you can speak the basics to your grandchildren, to your children. And you can help them find out how to set in motion in their own life some of these things. Not just have the answers so that they can memorize the answers and not find out and not learn how to arrive at the conclusion themselves. So, so that's one, those are 2 things. Commit to being better listeners, commit to personal study, to understand basics. If you need some help to do that, then you're committed to finding out how to improve, grow, and have a better grasp of what's basic and fundamental, right? This builds a platform from which you can share, from which you grow, from which you're able just to have a conversation with people with confidence and have an intelligent discourse. Right? Listen, anything going to hurt you, there's no shame in becoming articulate. Being able to say something, being able to put voice to it in a way that makes it understandable. There is, whether you're a preacher, teacher, or not, I see no downside to that, and I don't think you have to be any of those other things to be able to perform that function. All right. So, long-standing immaturity, we can't remain in this, in indefinite infant state, right? I said this last week. I liked it so well. I'm going to say it again this week. The kingdom of God is not Neverland. It's not a place where you refuse to grow up and you get to stay a kid and you get to just play with wooden swords and knock knots on each other's heads all day and fly around in fairy dust. Listen, there's time and a place for that. There's a time and a season for that in your life, and all that's wonderful and good, but the kingdom is not designed for you to stay that state perpetually. Right. And so for us to think about it in, beyond those terms is very important to do. So leaving these principles, leaving them, that's a heavy thing in chapter 6 there. And it says, so that means not to abandon them, but to move beyond them, to move into a new day. So who's he writing to? He's writing to a bunch of Jewish converts who have all of these traditional expectations of what Messiah was supposed to do. And at the end of the day, Messiah was supposed to make their lives better, make Jerusalem a better place, rid them of the Romans. Well, here we are. We're 50-some AD at this point, at the time this is written, maybe even early 60 AD. And Jerusalem is a train wreck. It's a mess. It's in turmoil and upheaval. It's not any better. So all of the traditional arguments against Jesus as the Messiah are starting to bear on the people who believed who he was. Those that had not exercised themselves, those that had not followed through, that were still weak, that were still babes, and shouldn't still be babes, all right? And so he said at some point you have to move beyond this. It's not so much that you abandon it, you look at it as what you used to get to this stage, and now you've got to move into a different arena. You've got to move forward. You've got to move onward. Because when he talks about the things there about baptisms and the laying on of hands, you say, but Pastor, we believe in baptism and we believe in the laying on of hands. I understand that. But this is not the context of this. The word baptism should be washings. So he's talking about Jewish ceremonialism. And when he talks about laying on of hands, he's not talking about praying for the sick. He's talking about the animal sacrifice, that they laid their hands on those animals to impart sin on them and to lay the burden of the sinner on the animal, because the temple was still in play here. Right. And so when he's talking about this stuff, he's talking about the old Jewish practice and mindset of things, that if you go back into this, and I quit early in this because he talks about if you go back into this is where some folks get this, how a pretty flimsy salvation out of it. But what he's talking about is he's talking to his Jewish comrades, and he's saying, look, you guys have tasted the powers of the age to come. You've received some stuff. You've had the Holy Ghost poured out in your life. You have tasted the good stuff. And if you go back, that's not the move you want to make. You go back to your own detriment. You go back to your own destruction. You're not going to grow. You're not going to benefit from that. Now you can take that and you can make that about the saved and the sin they came out of. You can do that, but literally he's talking to them about going back under Jewish practice and the customary practices of the law and moving back into temple sacrifice and moving back into all the things that they thought was how you waited until Messiah came. It was for them a rejection and a renunciation of Jesus that they'd already said was their Messiah, and moved back into ancient Jewish practice. That's what it amounted to. The great apostasy that Paul talks about. Some of us, we're just kind of willy-nilly looking for all that to happen somewhere in our future. But the reality of it is they were watching it happen in the first century. They were watching people fall away. That's what spawned this book. Okay? Anyway, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole in that one, but it's important, I think, to understand the context of it is designed to say, look, you guys have a lot going for you here, and you don't need to go back to this. You don't need to move back into these dead practices, these dead works, this continual thing that you guys are in where you stay so sin conscious all the time because you got all these sin offerings every day. Because the daily sacrifice for sin had not been ended officially yet. Jesus ended it by becoming the sacrifice on Calvary, but it did not play into that and catch up with that until the destruction of the temple. Until they ran out of lambs. Because the Romans had so sieged the city that they couldn't offer sacrifices anymore. Anyway. Let me get back to my stuff here, and I'm going to get you out of here pretty soon. So I know this probably hadn't been the best of things. So to become skillful, think of yourself as a redemptive building, a divine, ongoing, new covenant project in development. Think about what God's doing and wants to do, and think of yourself in that regard, in that light. And you say, okay, what are you doing? A little urban renewal. Maybe a little more than a fresh coat of paint, right? Maybe you want to do some renovation in my mind, right? And the way I think. Because when Paul talks about the renovation of the mind, being renewed in the spirit of your mind, is talking about a renovation. So that tells me if you renovate a building, you almost gut it on the inside, so to speak, and reform it and reconfigure it to the way that it needs to work and the way you want it to work best. Okay? So when he talks about when he talks about those kind of things, think of yourself as the project, as the new covenant project that God's building. You are God's building. We've covered that not that terribly long ago. You're God's cultivated field. God's working in your life and my life. This is the metaphor and the reality of what he has to say to us. So anyway, so if you think about that, we are under development right now. We are in the process of being developed into something more. You take an old building in this area and you see old buildings get repurposed and they get renovated, right? And it may not have been what they were originally set here to do or how to function, but they found a new life. They've been repurposed. And sometimes our life we get a makeover every now and again. God does some things. The life experiences do some things and change things for us. And we have to be willing to allow him to renovate some things, because things shift and change in life. If you're still, if you have a big family and, you get used to, when the kids are small, you get used to cooking for an army. When all those kids grow up and move out, you don't have to cook for an army every day, just when they come to visit, right? But if you never make that adjustment, you got all kinds of leftovers, all kinds of throwaway, right? You got to repurpose something. You got to think, okay, Jackie used to make biscuits on cookie sheets. When we had the boys at the house, and she'd make 2 cookie sheets worth of biscuits. And that's what she's used to doing. So if she ever makes biscuits, she still makes about at least a cookie sheet of biscuits, and thinks about who she can give them away to. Right? Anyway, so the more highly developed or the better developed we become, we illuminate the path forward and upward for succeeding generations. And here's how. I sat down the other day. I wrote this out last week, and so I'm going to say this, and hopefully it'll bless you and it'll help you. And I've got it written down, so if you would want to take it and look at it, that's fine, or want to write it down, need a copy of it, or whatever, well, that can be easily done. We need inspiration, but inspiration can be fleeting unless we become consistently available to God's presence. Okay? Inspiration is necessary, but you can't you're not always inspired. Some mornings you get up and you're not inspired to create this marvelous breakfast. Okay. We need inspiration. We need that. We need that spark. That's light. That's pizzazz, we'll call it. Okay. Holy Ghost pizzazz. I might just try to market that phrase. Anyway. But inspiration is, like I say, can be a fleeting thing. The one thing that keeps it consistent is making yourself available to the presence of God. And when you do that, then you find those moments are not as spread out, right? Okay? Consistent inspiration then becomes discipline. So now you're doing it. It's become sort of a routine, and you're doing this as a manner of life, a manner of living. Okay, you're doing this not because it's a rut and you're stuck and it's a routine, but because you like it, you love it, and you want to be moved, you want to be affected, you want to be influenced by that, and so and that moves into the realm of consistent inspiration, moves into the realm of discipline. Okay, and so discipline is the substance of service. ministry. So if you're going to be involved and you're going to help people and serve people, you need to be disciplined. Because if you're not disciplined, then you're never ready to do it, and they make you crazy. Right? I mean, it's kind of one of those side effects. All right? These things are built or they develop over time with particular attention to detail. So it's consistently over time, and you start to pay attention to things and you start to see it. It becomes more and more just part of who you are. Until detail becomes an involuntary function, just like a reflex. Like that, sit down in the doctor's office. I don't even know if they do this anymore, but it always amazed me. I always looked forward to him taking that little rubber hammer and hitting me on the knee so I could watch my leg fly up. Because I couldn't do a thing in the world about it. I'm wired funny. What can I say? But it amazed me. It fascinated me. It's this reflex thing. It just does this when you do this. Right? How do we figure that? Well, discipline kept, It's a funny thing. Anyway, but detail becomes an involuntary function, a reflex, and skillfulness or mastery is the result. When this stuff starts working in you in that method, in that manner, and in that form and fashion, then we are becoming skillful, and that mastery we are striving for, we start to see it. And we start to see it on display. And we start to see the impact and the effect of it for those who would be willing to hear it and be willing to submit and subject themselves to it. So, amen. That's all I got to share tonight. So, thank you for joining us. I have had all kinds of trouble with this thing. I've got it caught on I don't know how many things tonight. So it's not that I'm having a glitch. It's that I got a short wire. So thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate you. We love you. Be blessed.